Good evening. This is my Module 4 presentation on the Towards System article for EDL 550. My name is Emily Finley. This article was written by Hugh Hawkins. First, I would just like to say thank you for reading this article with me. It was rather long and intense, very wordy, so thank you for reading it and thank you for discussing it with me. A few common themes or terms that I ran into when I was reading included the roles of associations, finding common ground or identities, the development of standards, and the accreditation process. This reading took us back to 1895 through 1920, where associations were defining what was an acceptable school. What did it take for a school to provide for education for physicians, engineers, lawyers, and even teachers? Academic leaders were trying to create a system without using government authority. They didn't want the government guiding how the schools were composed or ran. Some of the associations that it talked about were the NASU, National Association of the State Universities, AAACES, the Association of American Agricultural Colleges and Experimental Stations. It was actually the only association with members in every state, so it could actually claim itself as a national body. The AAU, which was the American Association of Universities, they developed guidelines between graduate and undergraduate. And the AAC, which I forgot to list, was the Association of American Colleges. A common purpose that they all had in common was that they all wanted to gain recognition for their members. They wanted to be able to identify their members were part of their group. They just wanted recognition for what their institutions were doing or providing for their learners. Land-grant institutions during this period tried to find their common ground, but faced several challenges, starting with the lack of consistency across an entrance exam. This quote that was in the article said, "The whole problem of college entrance requirements is something which cannot be standardized for the whole country," by Williams Ellsworth Stone of Purdue. And what he's talking about there is sometimes they only had up to an 8th grade education, but that's because they had to go work in the field and provide for their family, or maybe their school only went to an 8th grade education. The resources in different areas really were very different, so to make a requirement for everyone to have or be able to obtain prior to the entry into the institution would be rather hard. Some of the regional associations overlapped. Some schools were members of more than one. However, this caused more stress than it did good for the institutions because they would worry more about one and then the other would lack, so it was really just more hectic than it was useful. The NASU represented the state universities, but it did not have a representative in every state. The National Conference Committee on Standards of Colleges and Secondary Schools in 1906 met and under the NASU, and they actually promoted a full regional accreditation bodies. They wanted common admission requirements, and they talked about some common terminology practices, which they developed pretty much the word unit, which would equal a year's study. You don't typically hear that used as much now. They developed practical standards and statistical comparisons. These comparisons made it easier for them to compare different schools. The NASU did not last long as a standardizer or a system maker. They just didn't have confidence, and they developed what I noticed throughout the article was a constant doubting of standardization. They all agreed that it was necessary. However, they did not all continue to think so once the process started to begin. The AAU took the reins of standardizing of American universities, and they began accrediting things, the universities themselves. The AAU got their funding from charging for fees to be inspected. They would charge a fee, and so with that fee money and money from the Carnegie Foundation, they were able to accredit over 130 different degrees. And there were benefits for their members, but I mean, who's to say it was a benefit at that time? I kind of question whether it was beneficial to the universities right at that time period, because they didn't have a lot of money already. They were having to pay for the fee to be accredited, and a lot of them were changing and developing practices that they didn't already have to be accredited, which cost them more money. So instead of spending a lot on education and things for the students, I think they started spending a little bit more on the accreditation, because someone had to fund the AAU. But universities did like to put on the front of their catalog that they were part of the national authority, that they were accredited, or that they were part of another organization. It was kind of like their bragging rights. That's how they publicized it to students. The AAU developed clear standards for the PhD. A diverse master's degree, and they had a list of bachelor arts degrees that could be obtained. They were in a time where there was lots of lists made. Everybody wanted to be on someone's list. So to make a Bachelor of Arts list, of course, it was more of a trend, it seemed to be a little bit in this time period, of making a list or getting on this list to be acceptable school or college. The members also would be able to confer with other universities when they were part of this organization, and that was one of the benefits that I noticed. They could actually, presidents from each university could share ways that they were handling situations of like hiring, salaries. They could share information with each other that they didn't have someone at their school to go and talk to and reference from. So there was like a free exchange of information. You had someone else to go to and ask how they were doing things, compare yourself to them. Standardization became really strong, but again, people started doubting it, and is this really what we want to do? Is it going to take away from our individualization? It was a big scare that, this is going to make tyranny instead of help us in the end, I guess. But AAU also had some terms that they defined, such as department, course, college, and school. I really think that the terminology is pretty important, because it talks about how when students transfer or they went to another school, if they didn't have the same kind of terminology, then it's harder to transfer their course credits, I guess. The next organization that came into play was the AAC. They developed criteria for minimum college and efficient college. They were not quite as large as the AAU, or it also didn't have such self-confidence in making lists and putting colleges on lists, or whether they were efficient or not. They just set criteria. They also admitted members to their organization, but they didn't accredit schools. They influenced presidents to adopt similar statistical methods, which pretty much made college administration, so that if everyone wrote out their college statistics in this way, then we could all study it as a science. So they influenced that. Just as a little recap so far, the AAU made its list of accepted colleges, and the NASU and their land grant association continued to urge for standard entrance and graduation requirements. These were things that you had to have to be a member. However, the ACE was a little different. The ACE, what stood out the most that they did, in my eyes, was issuing guidelines on how schools should be standardized and how guidelines for accredited bodies should be laid out. They also developed that a teacher schedule should only have 16 hours, which was that belief was adopted by many different boards. Diploma meals were also presented at this time. They were kind of unearthed and called out for what they are, being able to get a degree for $1 or going to school in someone's home. These places that were just printing out diplomas to say that someone was received a degree instead of actually going to school and earning the degree. They were unearthed through the ACE's Committee on Standards. With the ACE, the ACE also processed some more common terminology such as semester and credit, which we still use today. The ACE also started looking for qualitative data rather than quantitative data when fulfilling accrediting procedures. The accrediting process and the standardization really was a beneficial process to universities and colleges. However, it did begin to irritate the presidents because they felt like it was taking away the individualization of the schools. I think that all in all, it was looked at as that it was something they wanted to do, they wanted to accept, but it was going to take time, and people just would vote for it, but then they would be leery of it, and that was just a common trend throughout, I guess, because just like anything, change, people get kind of worried about change, and then they start changing their mind a little bit more. The pressing questions that I was left with, I have a quote here from Hawkins, and I have this quote, and it talks about being able to ask if an institution was accredited. It allowed students that were seeking higher education some protection against lures of advertisement or against those diploma mills, as I read about. But my question is, how does this quote relate to higher education today? Do you think this is something the average college student is aware of? And why would it be important to a college student today? Why is accreditation still important? My other question is common language in terms for questions each of the associations deemed necessary, and we know that many of them adopted common language. But why was it still hard for them to accept and adopt the idea of common terms? There were many that would be discussed, however, only a few would actually be adopted. And that's it. Thank you for watching my video and reading the article by Hawkins.